Chris.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for part two of the state of the cross-border industry. And we're focusing specifically on tariffs and customs for this session. We'll be spending the next hour reviewing some of our findings, and we'll also do a deep dive into some of the more recent tariff changes that we've had as well. If you haven't downloaded the report, highly recommend that you do so. And I've put that in the chat. Throughout today's conversation, if you have any questions, feel free to add those in the Q&A section that you'll find on your screen inside of Zoom. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your questions today, we will certainly send you an email afterwards. Feel free to chat me if you have any questions. And with that, thank you again for joining us. And I will turn it over to our presenters, Rathna and Maia. Would love for the two of you to introduce yourself.
Rathna, please.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Very excited to be here for the second edition. And, we have some exciting slides prepared for you and also hopefully time for your questions. I'm Rathna Sharad, founder and CEO of Flavor Cloud. I've been in the cross-border logistics and global trade compliance space for the last 30 years, 2 decades or more in e-commerce, as well as B2B enablement. So very much steeped in this world. But today we're going to focus a lot about Flavor Cloud Network, data and insights. So excited to go through that with you.
Hi, everybody. Maia Benson, Chief Business Officer at Flavor Cloud. Definitely excited to be here for the sequel. And in August or September, we'll come back with the third edition in our awesome State of Cross-Border data set and reports. I've been in cross-border logistics since 2013, so I think that's about 15 years, starting with Pitney when we powered $1 billion worth of eBay global GMV, then dragging that into Shopify, growing all things shipping and fulfillment as their second US employee, and then most recently here at Flavor Cloud. So really looking forward to walking everybody through a lot of the data and the learnings that we're seeing as we're living in a very highly tariff volatile world these days for Q1 and Q2 2025. All right, let's kick off. Rochelle, next slide, please. Thanks. So as I mentioned, we had chapter 1 of our state and cross-border series released back in May. We will make sure that the link to all that data is available to everyone as we go through the webinar today. You can also find it on our website. That was deeply focused on consumer insights, growth by market, growth by SKU by market, and then how we are seeing tariffs impact global e-commerce around the world. Today, we're going to talk, as Rochelle mentioned, about all the things we're seeing around customs and tariffs specifically. And then, as I previewed, please join us in a month for chapter 3, which will go deep on the actual shipping part of how global trade is been working in the first half of this year. So coming soon, next chapter. We're very lucky here at Flavor Cloud. We are accumulation of all of our merchants' shipments and orders. So we have over 100 million in GMV and shipments on the platform that comprises this data, 500 plus e-commerce brands, and over 80 data points that we pull from our aggregate data set to bring these insights to you today. So that is the source of our data. And then if you zoom out on the report, for which I think we've just shared, I think there's some headline findings we just wanted to get out in front quickly. Number one, of no surprise to anyone, we've lived this together. We're still living this together, that the tariff regulatory environment is structurally shifting, right? So we have seen really since January, new tariffs being born, taken away, sometimes reborn, sometimes adjusted, that's really influencing and affecting global commerce that we're gonna go deep on. Secondly, customs is taking an advantage of these new regulations and obviously enforcing them in new and more stringent ways than they have in the past. So there's an acceleration of enforcement to candidly collect the tariff revenue that is being deployed. Country of origin. So a lot of us refer to this as made in. So where a good is made is technically called the country of origin, but it's really important to say made in because as we know, tariffs apply to those goods based on their country of origin made in, not where they're shipped from. So those are very, very different things. You could have a made in China SKU coming into the United States from Canada, shipped out of Canada, and it's still going to incur the tariffs. So that's just one example of how country of origin in this volatile tariff environment is actually affecting both supply and demand of global commerce. So we'll go deep on that. We are also seeing in our findings the need to mitigate a single source of manufacturing. So we can see this clearly because tariffs today are being levied against many of the highest volume manufacturer sourcing countries. And so it's important to diversify and de-risk your basket of sourcing so that you can build some immunity and some resilience around where these tariffs are most acutely being deployed against. And then lastly, we are seeing significant changes in where merchants choose to place their inventory and house their inventory. So we're seeing supply chains becoming really regional. So if sourcing somewhere in Asia, a regional supply chain looks like inventory moves right to the EU. So China to the EU, China to Canada, thus bypassing a lot of the volatility we are seeing in the United States. So much more diversification and regionalization of where inventory lives to mitigate the unknown and volatile tariffs. All right, let's, before we go further into the data and the findings in Chapter 2, I thought it might be worth it to zoom out just for a second and do a quick pulse check on where the global e-commerce market is today. So Rochelle, thank you. We'll go to the next slide. So Shopify reported Q1 2025 earnings, and in that they saw a 31% increase in international GMV across all of their merchants. That's great. At Flavor Cloud, we have seen year-over-year merchant order growth at 76%. And again, gentle reminder here at Flavor Cloud, we power cross-border only commerce. So this is a cross-border only lens. And then of note, some of the fastest growing e-commerce markets we've seen is UAE at almost 200% year-over-year growth, New Zealand at 131, and Singapore almost at 100% year-over-year growth. So those are some of the standouts that we've seen from our merchants. All right, thank you. Rathna.
Yeah. So getting into some of the actual implications for tariffs, we want to kind of look at what is happening around the world. So today we're focused on a US lens, but essentially what's happening around the world is that borders are becoming less porous. There is significant change. We saw that with Brexit. And then with the EU, IOS changes, but really around the world, there's tariff implications that are happening because of protectionism, because of the ability to control what comes into the country in terms of border security, as well as eliminating cheap goods from coming into the country and creating efficiencies for domestic businesses. And finally, everybody wants a piece of the tax revenue. As e-commerce grows, we're seeing a fundamental shift in this direction. So it's much more about tariffs are here to stay. These types of changes that we see globally are going to be more frequent. And it's much more about being ready for these changes and being more agile and being able to adapt quickly to these changes. So that's what we're going to really recommend to brands, but also just in general, relying on partners that can help mitigate margin implications or supply chain implications is the key.
I
Next
think
slide.
what's really interesting here, Rathna, is most people kind of have paid attention or woken up to this tariff world here in H1 2025. And I think what's really critical in the slide to take away is no, this has been building for years.
Yeah.
And more than half of the build is coming from three countries, the US, China, and the EU. So it's
Yeah,
really
absolutely. And I think when you look at it, this doesn't even have 2025. It is going to look drastically different. And obviously, the US has been leading that charge and causing significant implications and reciprocal tariffs as well. So we'll see more of that going into next year.
perfect. So before we do get to 2025, which is the next slide, let's look at 2020 to 2024. So for the past 4 years alone, all the protectionism, penalties plus liquidation has driven 22% more revenue to the Border Protection Services. The number one reason by far, almost 75% of the drivers of penalties or liquidation have been because the commercial invoice has had a value of the goods that was lower than it should have been. So therefore, the importer paid less tariffs or import duties based on that lower valuation. So we have been seeing, over 4 years, more revenue to the tune of 22% more, and most of it's because importers have undervalued the goods and therefore underpaid their duties. So that's been the data through 24. Now let's segue to 2025. So what we're seeing in 2025 through May 31st, so this is almost all of H1 2025, is that CBP general tariff revenue is up to $108 billion versus the same period last year at 88, which is, I think, about 23%. So these tariffs are driving in 1/2 of 1 year alone an additional 23% revenue into the US. The largest driver, if you look to the right under the line in bold, almost half of that total volume is the increase on the made in China, country of origin China products coming in.
That's right.
Okay, so now let's gear shift out of macro market land and go deeply into the data that we find in our Chapter 2 report. So to kick us off, what should surprise no one, hopefully, is that customs in terms of processing all of this volume with new duties and taxes to collect is slowing down. So specifically, if you look over on the right-hand chart, you've got 5 countries here. All of them are seeing significant increases in customs holds or delays. The number one country being Mexico. If everybody rewinds into December of 2024, so right before 2025 kicked off, you all might recall that Mexico had some pretty significant changes to what's known as their IMEX program. So Mexico had a policy and a program called IMEX to drive more labor benefit out of Mexico by bringing goods in from outside of Mexico and using their talent, their labor, to add value to those imports before exporting. And so all of the IMEX changes to stop that or change the license certification to get IMEX licenses really highlights the gear in Mexico of them slowing down as they made significant changes to this program. Rathna, do you want to bring anything else to life on the IMEX world?
Not necessarily IMEX, but just in general, I think this corroborates what we were talking about in terms of just borders becoming less porous. What does that mean? It means actually customs scrutiny is higher. In general, some of the hardest countries to import into are Italy and India. India has actually seen some of that easing due to their processes becoming more automated. But in general, you're seeing that all other countries, the scrutiny is just increasing. And that means there's higher degree of accuracy necessary, more granular declarations also necessary to get through customs clearance in a timely manner.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right, what else did we learn? There has been volume decline on a global basis because of the tariffs for kind of 5 top commodities. So if we looked at protein powder, vitamin supplement called biotin, some antihistamine, some petroleum jelly, some shampoos. So these are kind of 5 of the top HS codes that we see. On a global basis, you can see every single one of them has been negatively impacted. So there's less volume being sold around the world. And then what's really of note is if you look at the right-hand column, where these HS codes, where these products are made, when they're made in the United States, so country of origin, United States, made in the USA, and going into Canada, you see stuff like biotin, petroleum jelly, and shampoo actually more negatively impacted, meaning selling even less volume than the global benchmark in the middle, due to Canada's reciprocal tariffs on made in the USA goods. Okay. And remember, folks, those made in the USA goods can be shipped from the USA to Canada, or they could be made in the USA goods sitting in the UK and being shipped into Canada. So like those countries, the COO matters. Okay, Rathna.
Yeah, so let's deep dive into country of origin. So in our data, one of the things that you see on the right is in Flavor Cloud Network, what is the composition that we see? A significant 38, almost 39% is US made goods, and 34% is China. And then you've got the rest of the world in terms of where products are manufactured. That's our network data. Now, the graph on the left, the pie, shows what is the composition of an order. So typically, do you have a mix of commodities from 2 different countries is what this data is showing us. And around 7% have more than one country of origin in the mix. So what that really means is if there is scrutiny, let's say on a made in China combined with a made in another country, then there is going to be, a formal clearance process and tariff applied to that commodity that is made in China, for example. But it could still cause delays in terms of customs clearance and scrutiny. So that's essentially the takeaway. And for now, de minimis is something that is very specific to China, but this is something that we will be watching as that changes with the new bill.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to one of our merchants, and they said, "Gosh, all the stuff I import, Maya, I tend to have 2 orders per 2 SKUs per order, and 90% of the time, one of them is made in China." And so they literally use the word, and I don't know if everyone on the webinar today is saying the same things, but these made in China SKUs in a mixed shipment order become really poison pills. Right? From a processing standpoint, from a duties and taxes standpoint. So just wanted to share that anecdote.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. And this is purely if you're looking at a single origin, so really country of manufacture, then you can kind of see, again, US, China, and you'd see rest of the world. There's, multiple countries involved there. I think we mentioned this earlier. The country of origin is really important, along with the value of goods. Um, because a product, just because it is transshipped or essentially moving through a country does not change the country of origin. And also, there are some very specific regulations on what constitutes as being, if you were to simply embellish a product, if you were to add a sticker on a t-shirt, that does not qualify as being manufactured in that country. So there are some very specific, regulatory compliance aspect that goes into evidence of something having been manufactured in China versus the country that it's shipped through. Okay, next one. This is, going deeper into country of origin and why it matters. I think we talked a lot about, US origin goods, and then Chinese origin goods. Typically, what we see in our data is that for health and wellness, it's overwhelmingly US made in our data. So you can kind of see on the chart on the top left, it's 62% is US. And similarly, if you look at the bottom right, beauty and cosmetics, again, has US really being the main country of manufacturing. And if you look at, the household goods and other categories, you'll see that Chinese origin is much more significant. Again, in apparel, China tends to be a bigger factor. So overall, it really matters where the country of origin, where goods are manufactured, because obviously the tariff implications are very much associated with the country that you're manufacturing in and sourcing from. Okay, next slide. Now, this is important as we start looking at these conversion metrics that we saw across the network. Now, remember that this data is all the way through May, the end of May. And so that's what you see in this graph, starting from the beginning of the year. Hopefully, we will be able to share this as things change through the rest of the year as well, as we track these changes. If you look at the biggest, I want to draw your attention to the purple line. That's health and wellness. That is the category that saw a pretty massive decline. You can see the line go down from 23 to 12%, so significant decline. If you look at beauty and cosmetics, it's a really interesting story. That's the orange line. You see that there was a dip, especially when we had the tariffs kick in March, but you see that it has recovered since. So it is one of those things where it's actually back to where it was in the beginning of the year. So the implications have somewhat gone away, and it'll be interesting to see what happens for the rest of the year. Now, in terms of household goods, again, a very similar story. It has recovered and it's now, pretty stable. And somewhat similar on the apparel and fashion category. It is still lower. There are implications in the apparel category, especially because a lot of those are manufactured in China. But what we also see is that some of the pricing strategies are making a difference in terms of conversions back up and increasing. Next slide. Okay, This one is conversion impact by country of origin. This is really interesting because it, again, tells a very different story. Country of origin, China to the US, that's the orange line. Pretty dramatic implication there. So this very much, is in line with market data that we're seeing shared broadly, but it's pretty dramatic to see the implications there. This is being imports into the US and essentially a country of origin, China and Hong Kong.
And
And then
remember,
the other lines are somewhat tempered. Yes, Maya?
I say, remember, this data, y'all, is when the 145% tariffs
That's
from
right.
made in China coming into the US. So just an important calibration. There has been some
Yeah.
relief there, but just wanted to gently remind such a significant change is really because 145.
The last thing I will point to here is the purple line. This is country of origin US going to China. So there were some fluctuations, I would say, dips in March, again, when the tariffs were all over the place. And now there's been a recovery there as well. So that is interesting to see as well. So I'd say the takeaway here is that we're starting to see things stabilize and folks actually adapt to the tariffs because ultimately, the biggest takeaway is that tariffs are here to stay. They're not going away. It is really about how can you adapt to changes like tariffs. There may be other changes in the global, landscape that happen, but really it's about, how can you be nimble and adapt quickly as well as be resilient in the face of these changes. Next. This is again illustrating country of origin China to the US and in more detail, as well as US to China. You can see the recovery there is starting to happen. I think you'll start seeing that go up actually as we go into H2. Okay. I wanted to spend some time. I talked about some of those lines where we're starting to see recovery. One of those strategies that we've recommended and seen some really great results on is localized market pricing. So this slide actually illustrates an example of a vitamin and supplement product where, deeply understanding for this SKU what the duties, taxes, and fees are. In this case, it was 19 GBP. Which was the landed cost, if you will. It's the duties, taxes, tariffs, and any customs-related fees. Because remember, there's a fee component as well. Because when you're bringing goods in, there is now a fee that's being applied. For example, if you're bringing in from China, there's a fee in terms of the carrier processing fees, if you will. So all of that adds up to your complete landed cost. And by including the landed cost into the product pricing, and in this example, they've actually included the shipping of 10 British pounds into the product price. By doing this, the customer actually saw a 13x higher conversion. So it is a really powerful strategy that we've seen employed across multiple verticals. We call this localized market pricing, and there's SKU-based recommendations that are leveraging network data, the Flavor Cloud network data, to provide baselines and then kind of adapt it as tariffs change so that you as a brand are not eroding your margins. You're always staying protected. But at the same time, the consumer gets an all-inclusive cost and it's not getting any additional bills after the fact. And this works really within the DDP realm, which is the delivery duties paid model, which we highly recommend. That's one of the ways you can mitigate the tariff implications. Okay, next slide. So we wanted to spend some time talking about tariffs itself, and rather than really go through all of each one, this is focused entirely on what happened since May. So really the most recent changes. In the beginning of May, 321, which is the de minimis of $800, was killed for Chinese origin goods. So this is China and Hong Kong. And towards the end of May, there was the CIT, the Court of International Trade, had ruled against Liberation Day tariffs, but a stay was then in effect, and it still remains in effect. Awaiting the appeal. So we're still waiting on a decision. That's likely to happen sometime soon. But at this point, there's no decision on that front. So everything has stayed the way it is. In June, on June 12th, there was the China deal that was done. The overarching takeaway there is that nothing really changed on the China front. So everything that we had in place, which was the 20% IEEPA, which is the emergency tariff, and then the 10% reciprocal tariff, as well as any duty, that is the base duty, the MFN or the most favored nation duties, do apply cumulatively up to 55%. So no changes there. And the deal is done, but it hasn't really changed anything on that front. And then the next change was announced June 30th, and that was the 10%, the UK-US economic deal. Again, no changes. The 10% on import stays for UK. Also, the outbound US to UK stays in place, except for some preferential treatment for pharma goods. And then the next a change was announced in August 1st, and this is still pending official confirmation. So nothing has been put in place. And just as a reminder, we watch for actual, the Federal Register changes. So that really means when they go in effect, that's when Flavor Cloud will actually make these changes. So you're always staying compliant. But just in terms of what's being proposed here, it is Vietnam is now getting tariffs. So there's a 20% tariff on made in Vietnam goods. And there's a transshipment. This is where, goods that are manufactured in other countries that are being shipped through Vietnam, again, trying to close the loophole, would be 40% tariffs. The rest of the countries listed here are somewhat very similar to Liberation Day tariffs that we heard of earlier in the year, with slight differences, somewhere between 20 to 40% across these countries. Again, this basically means that we're going to need to wait for confirmation on when these go into effect, but they are essentially coming. And letters have been sent to each of these countries. So I think, this is the deal in progress, if you will. And finally, de minimis. So I want to talk a little bit about de minimis in general, and then also about de minimis violation penalties, which is one of the new things. The big, beautiful bill that has proposed an end to de minimis. So currently, de minimis was killed for China origin goods. So it's basically China and Hong Kong. But according to this bill, it's really about de minimis going away for all countries. And that is expected to happen sometime before July 2027. We actually think that that is going to be on a much faster path, even as early as this year. But again, that is something that we're going to be watching for, because that has massive implications. There's two major implications. One is on the consumer front. It just changes consumer buying power, if you will, because you are paying more. You're paying duties and tariffs on commodities that the U.S. consumer is not used to. It certainly has implications to brands on where they manufacture. While we're talking about diversification of sourcing and alternate sourcing, it somewhat evens the playing field there when that goes into effect for other countries. So that is something to be watchful for as well. And finally, the August 4th, we talked a lot about scrutiny and changes in the customs clearance processes, and there is heavy scrutiny by CBP in this case for any kind of violations. There are significant penalties for first and subsequent violations, 5K for first and 10K plus for subsequent violations. But they're really watching for fraudulent behavior in terms of, how are you valuing the goods? How are you declaring country of origin? Misclassification of HS codes and commodities. So these are all under heavy scrutiny, and kind of under the radar activity is what they're targeting. And there are much larger fines in terms of audits and also jail time and legal implications as well. So this is one of those, massive efforts that's been kicked off by the CBP as well. Next. Let's get... Yeah, I'll let you take this one, Maya.
I think we're going to do this.
I'll go for this. Yeah. So we wanted to kind of give you strategies. I think we've talked about several of these, but this is really about kind of, leaving you with 6 different things to consider. Some of these strategies, you might apply 1 or 2 of these, or really think about all of them and how they apply to your business. Rethinking sourcing is a really important one. I know we've talked about, alternate sourcing location. This is one of those things that takes time to be able to, go to a different source, negotiate. But in the long run, it just builds resilience, even if you have similar tariffs and de minimis goes away. It still is a better strategy to be able to compete with multiple sourcing partners, build competition that way, and really think about nimbleness should something change dynamically on the tariff front. So we think that is a really good and important strategy for brands to consider. Second is regional fulfillment is something that we're seeing. So supply chains are becoming decentralized. So thinking about nearshoring capabilities, and that goes hand in hand with optimizing full stack cost, which is number 5. It really is about cost benefit analysis, doing that in terms of what does it cost to bring wholesale goods and nearshore it, let's say in the EU, for example, to serve EMEA. Or maybe, an APAC strategy versus North America strategy or rest of the world strategy from whichever one of these fulfillment centers has the better ROI. So really deeply understanding the tariff implications and what it takes in terms of the full stack cost is important. Third, is the HS codes are really important. Granular HS codes. Having incorrect HS codes can actually be detrimental. There can be significant differences in duty rates between the HS codes, so getting accurate, not only because of the penalties and scrutiny, but also because of the tariff implications and margin implications. And then considering tariff engineering, there are many different strategies that you could employ where just in terms of alternate composition of goods can lead to better tariffs. Number 4 is adapting pricing. We talked about localized market pricing. That was an illustration of this. It's really thinking about how can you build pricing in a way that you can essentially pass on tariffs or a portion of that to consumers so that your margins are protected and that you're able to still have great conversion rates because they are used to having that all-inclusive pricing. When they purchase domestically, even in the wholesale world, that's very much the strategy in terms of how we come up with a market-based pricing. So this is very much bringing that same paradigm in the e-commerce cross-border realm, if you will. We talked about number 5. So the last one is DDP. This is one of the easiest ones to really implement. It is a great way to ensure that you're always on top of the tariffs, and that technology through the platform is taking care of all of these implications and implementing tariffs and giving you a guaranteed landed cost so that you don't have to worry about, are the tariffs in effect today or are they not? And are they different tomorrow? And what is in effect? So all of that complexity is kind of removed when DDP is used in combination with number 4, which is the localized market pricing. It really eliminates any of the conversion concerns and makes for a really seamless end consumer experience. So those are the 6 strategies we recommend. Next.
All right. As Rathna mentioned earlier, just because something ends up on Truth Social, just because something ends up as an executive order, doesn't actually mean it's official and has to be acted on by agencies like CBP. It has to hit something called the Federal Registrar to become real truth and something the agencies have to act on. So we have built an authoritative hub for y'all that really focuses on what the agencies have to actually act on and therefore is real and is going to be implemented at the borders. So please join us here for any follow-up questions, ongoing support, as we're still living in a very, very volatile world.
So with that, we will open up the floor for any questions, and feel free to put them either in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A section. We do already have a couple questions that have come in, and the first one is related to pricing strategies. And so the question related to pricing strategies, what other pricing strategies can merchants take to drive better consumer conversion?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, ultimately, it's about understanding at the SKU level what the pricing implications are. So essentially, what did the tariffs do to this particular SKU? It's based on obviously where you're manufacturing and sourcing. So that is part of, in that example that I showed, I talked about landed cost. Landed cost is essentially the duties, taxes, tariffs at the SKU level, understanding what that is in entirety. This also includes any kind of carrier-related fees, because remember now there's a fee for actually carriers processing through CBP, for example. And so it's really that fully inclusive fee, understanding what that is, and then making a determination on, do you want to pass all of that on into a product price or a portion of it? And then A/B testing is really key as well. I think including shipping, not including shipping, there's many different levers that you can use. We have a conversion optimization recommendation engine that will give you the pricing that you should be at. And that's really useful because it's based off of network data, but also based off of your specific SKU. And then one of the really important thing is that building history for your own, SKU and how that is converting for the market. So leveraging this technology to have the initial recommendations and then looking at the performance, historical performance, and then tweaking that is what the localized market pricing engine does. So that is one part of it. That's something that you can do with Flavor Cloud, and the team will be happy to help you make those decisions at the SKU level. You can employ that strategy for your highest converting SKUs and certainly for your top markets. Each market will have a slightly different optimization depending on what it is. And so we can walk you through that. The second is obviously looking at, with your sourcing partner, really thinking about, how you might mitigate some of those pricing changes. We've seen that as well, employed by several brands successfully. So those are some options on the pricing. And I will add, tariff is also the other, as an HS code, understanding what the tariff is for the HS code is the third key part of that. So really ensuring that you have accurate 10-digit codes, especially going into a specific country, that's important because the tariffs are different depending on what the HS code is.
Okay. We actually did have a very specific question related to HS codes. I have dropped the link to schedule a growth consultation in the chat. So if you have specific questions about your upcoming shipments or about shipping to any particular country, you can find that either by looking at the Tariff and Trade Hub, or you can schedule time with one of our CSMs so that to walk through a growth consultation. All right. We did get another question. Is there any way I can get more information about a CDN corporation selling made in China goods into the US first by way of a drop shipment and then spinning up our US website again? Right now, we have pulled the plug on our US sales at the moment. I want to yes, and because right now we've pulled the plug on our US sales at the moment. There's also a really nice thank you from the person asking the question also. Sorry, I know I stumbled over that a little bit. Maia and Rathna, did you get the gist of the question?
So is that about drop shipping from China to the US? Is that
That's what I interpreted.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, can you drop ship? Absolutely. It really depends on, is it B2B, which it appears to be if you are trying to bring bulk goods into the country. So we do support D2C as well as B2B. So yes, that can be something that we can support in terms of figuring out what the right compliance needs are, the landed costs are, the shipping options are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's maybe important to note is if you're drop shipping to a consumer in the US from China, you're going to be responsible for all appropriate made in China import duties. So if it's going to a consumer, that comes in at the retail price you sold it at. So I thought there might be some nuance in there with a website, US-based website. I didn't know if they were going for a US-based entity. So please, whoever's asking the question, hit us up if there's a nuance here. But if it's pure drop ship, China to a consumer in the US, the rated duty value will be at the retail price you sold it at.
Looks like it's B2B. So
Oh,
yeah.
there we go. Okay, so then that's an important nuance.
Yeah.
Great. And if there are any other questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A section here. There is a question regarding transshipping specifically. So you had mentioned tariff on transshipping through Vietnam. What is the impact of tariffs on transshipping through the US? As we know, a lot of companies have used US to ship cross-border.
Yeah, so first of all, on Vietnam, we still don't have the exact implications of transshipping. It's just been very high level, so we're waiting on exactly what that is. But the question on transshipping within the U.S., that's kind of what used to be the norm. So essentially, shipments used to be brought in through Canada or Mexico into the US, and then it would be sold to the rest of the world. And because US has a lot of the infrastructure, some of the best infrastructure to ship outbound to rest of the world, with the de minimis changes, especially for 3-1 essentially going away for Chinese origin goods, that was a very massive issue, which basically brought that to an end. In terms of, so you are paying duties and taxes as you import goods into the country. If you are transshipping, your options are you could do an FTZ, or bonded warehouse. And that is certainly one of the strategies where you defer the duties until it actually leaves the country.
So that appears to be, oh, sorry, Maya, did you have something you wanted to add there?
There's nothing wrong with transshipping. I think what the world is paying attention to in new ways is where it affects or could risk an effect to changing what the country of origin is, right? That is why you see in the Big Beautiful Bill a 40% tariff of transshipping through Vietnam, right? If there's a known trend where stuff going through Vietnam gets a changed COO, so it goes from being made in China to being made in Vietnam, right? That's where I think the flags are being raised.
Well, thank you both for the deep dive into these issues and into this conversation. That appears to be our last question right now. So first, thank you to our speakers today, Rathna, Maia, great information. Thank you to all of you who attended. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to the Flavor Cloud team. We will be sending you an email with a link to the recording and a link to the relevant materials that we shared here today. Feel free to schedule time, global growth consultation with our team if you have specific questions around your program. With that, we'll wrap up for the day and say thank you once again for attending.
Thank you.